Hello and welcome to a very drizzly and damp Grow Together Food Gardens episode where we'll be looking at my potato experiment, which requires no digging whatsoever, but it does need copious amounts of hay, and we'll be comparing that to my father's very traditional method of making a hole, putting the potato in and earthing up. So we will look at the pros and cons of each of these methods. So in the last episode, I unveiled my very swirly design for my half of my father's allotment, because while I'm breaking rules, well, who says you have to plant in a straight line? So I set it out by basically the dragging of the foot method. I did measure the first parts to make sure I'd got it to scale, and then it was just a matter of doing the rest by eye, because this is a very free-form design. It didn't need to be every last bit of it measured. So it's almost like a labyrinth now as you walk around it. So now that I've got an idea of the size and shape of the borders, it's time to get those potatoes in. Okay, so according to conventional wisdom, the best way to plant potatoes is from doing rows from north to south. That way they utilise the sun the most. Now, even though I'm doing a swirly pattern, if I was so inclined, I could still plant them in rows with alignment of north and south. Now, my father's obviously just gone from left to right because that makes sense with his plot. So it does give me a lot more freedom, this method. But I'm wondering, are potatoes really that picky? Does it really make that much difference? When the sun in the middle of the summer is so high, surely they're going to get sun no matter what. Wouldn't it make more sense, if they are picky, to ditch these rows completely and just have them dotted around so that there is plenty of space? Because I'm not earthing up, I could just dot them about so they're not in rows, and surely they're going to get a lot more sun. I don't know, you tell me. Do you know how fussy potatoes are? Does it make a big difference if they have a little bit of shade? So that's my 3 varieties just spaced out, and all I've got to do now is cover them in 20 centimetres of straw. Now, I want to be very clear, I am not doing the Ruth Stout method correctly because I only discovered it 2 weeks ago, and what I was meant to have done was to put some spoiled straw, so that's straw that started, not straw, hay, spoiled hay on the ground in the autumn. So it's already starting to decompose, and then by the time the potatoes go in, there's already lots of little tiny bits and pieces that are broken off and decomposed. So basically a new soil has started to form. So as I only found out about the methods 2 weeks ago, that's why I've added the layer of manure, because that's more or less the process. And I've only been able to get hold of 8 bales of hay that has started to decompose. The rest is premium grade animal feed hay, which is obviously going to take a lot longer to break down. So I'm not sure how successful this method is going to be because I'm not doing it correctly this year. Next year I will. So don't judge it on my results this year if you're going to try it yourself. I've reused last year's weed suppressant membrane, just quickly popped it round so that it makes a path, and now you can get the hay on. Now, applying the hay is a very straightforward method. You basically break up the hay bale and you scatter it on because you want it to be light and fluffy so that potatoes or any other crop that you're going to sow can actually push its way up through the hay. And ideally you want it about 20 centimetres deep, so that's about 8 inches, and that way you're trapping in the moisture in the soil, but you're also stopping weeds from growing. So you just basically fluff it up. Now I must admit I had vastly overestimated the number of hay bales I was going to require because I didn't realise just how much they fluffed up. So you actually don't need anywhere near the quantity you think you might. And also, just to be clear, it is only potatoes that you lay on the ground like this. Any other crop you are going to properly plant in the soil and then have the hay come up around it. It's important not to cover the leaves of anything you're sowing, like the sweet corn. They need a clear way to come up. So you can just move the hay to one side in order to have things germinate if you're going to sow directly in the soil, or you pop them into containers to germinate them and then just plant them as you would normally. It's basically a very deep mulch. That's all this method is. The reason you can do this with potatoes is because technically they're a tuber which is sort of halfway between a stem and a root, so therefore they can quite happily sit on the surface of the soil once they're covered in a mulch, and then they will root into the ground and also produce most of the other tubers on the surface for easy access. Although the hay will no doubt need topping up as it starts to settle and throughout the season as things start to grow. Now you may be worried that any seeds in the hay may germinate. Well, that's fine, because the ones at the bottom, they'll try and push up, but there won't be enough light, and any seeds that start to germinate at the top, their roots aren't going to make it down to the bottom. But if there are any weeds that germinate, you just add more hay to the mix, and that usually takes care of it. Now I was worried about the hay blowing away, but actually it sticks to itself and holds down quite well. The only slight downside with it is it does look quite messy. You know, to begin with, this doesn't look that great. I don't know that my swirly shapes have helped much either, but in time I think it should be all right. Well, we'll soon find out, or I'll never hear the end of it, basically. So I'll pop back in 10 days' time approximately and see how it's getting on and seeing if it needs a top up. And here's how it's looking at the moment. A complete mess, but under there, if the mice haven't eaten them, I'm slightly concerned I might have created a rodent bed and breakfast. Nice cosy place to sleep, and then they got potatoes to snack on. Oh well, no, there's still a potato. Has anything happened to said potato? Aha, roots are forming. Better tuck it back. Because it will still root down into the soil, even though I'm not technically planting it in the soil. So yes, it's not the most attractive thing in the world, but hopefully it will produce a reasonable crop of potatoes. Time will tell. Now my father's sensible side seems fine. Nothing come up just yet. But when we look at what he's had to do to get to the same point, so he chose to rotivate, but most people on the allotment, they have hand dug their plots. Now we've both put manure on. I put 4 inches on his side of the allotment and 2 on mine. But normally, as I say, you don't need the manure. You just use the hay. He's had to get in and plant every single individual potato down the hole, cover it with soil, mound it up. Now he's left enough room between each row so that he can get his rotavator in again, and he's going to rotivate again and then mound them up even more, and he'll be watering his potatoes throughout the growing season. Whereas I've just basically got hold of some hay. Ignore the fact I've had to do manure this year because I was a bit late with it, but normally place potatoes on the ground, cover with hay, and then I'm not going to touch them till they're ready. I'm not going to water them. I'm going to do absolutely nothing to really test this method. And when I want some new potatoes, I'll just lift the hay to one side and help myself without having to dig up an entire plant and disturb it. So even if I don't get anywhere near the quantity of potatoes that my father gets on his side, although it will be interesting to compare yields, I've done so little work to achieve it over the entire growing season, it's surely worth having a few less when you don't have to do much at all. Now in the next episode I'm going to be featuring vertical vegetable gardening and small space gardening, as I've had several of you write in and ask for tips and suggestions on what to grow in small spaces. So I hope this damp and drizzly episode hasn't put you off growing your own food, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one, which I hope is drier. Until then, take care. Bye-bye. Look at the state of your nose, and worse, look at the state of the allotment. Have you been trying to get to Australia? You're going to get me in so much trouble.